No more half measures. Hey guys, what's up? And today I'm gonna do a review on the new Better Call Saul Season 3. I know I'm a bit late, but forgive me. And yes, finally I can catch up with the show. So let's do a brief recap of the last two seasons. So Jimmy was a lawyer who's playful and colorful. His girlfriend Kim got a case from the bank Mesa Verde last season, but unfortunately Jimmy's brother's law firm HHM took the case. So Jimmy did some trickery to his brother, Chuck, in order to stop them from having the case. Meanwhile, after Nacho and Mike met, Mike became interested in all the cartel stuff and wanted to bust them. So now we're at episode 1, Mabel. And every year we get a little glimpse in Jimmy, or Gene's life after the events of Breaking Bad. First season, we see Gene watching his old Better Call Saul ads. Second season, we see Gene stuck in a trash room. And every flash forward gets more complex. But still, all the flash forwards doesn't fit too much into the plot. So back to the present timeline. The show immediately picks up where it ended in season 2. And continues. It's still Jimmy being Jimmy. Chuck being Chuck. There's not much to say in the plot line of Jimmy. But in Mike's plotline, there's also not much to it, except that he's still trying so hard to bust the cartel and do smart things. I noticed a couple of Breaking Bad references, like bugs and lilies of the valleys, but still, overall, it could have been way more dramatic and fun. But the episode is still pretty boring. Well, then it's episode 2, Witness, written by Thomas Schnoz, who also wrote 1 Minute, Say My Name, and Pimento. This is gonna be great. And it really turned out that this episode is really good. The Chuck vs. Jimmy feud has reached another climactic point, and Jimmy also helped Mike stalk some gangster. And yes, one of the highlights of the episode is Gus Fring's return. Not a spoiler, by the way. I love that character in Breaking Bad, and it's great to see him return. And other than that, spoiler alert. Alright. Ernesto couldn't hold it and told Kim about Chuck's tape recording of Jimmy's confession to a felony crime. And of course, Kim told Jimmy. So in the last scene, Howard went to Chuck's place to discuss about their next move to attack Jimmy. But speak of the devil, cause Jimmy then showed up. Jimmy rushed into Chuck's place, looked for the tape recorder, and destroyed the tape. Jimmy had the upper hand, right? Wrong. Then Howard and another man revealed themselves, and Chuck asked them, "Are you a witness?" "Yes." Then the entire scene went silent, and we realized this is a con. This is a con to trick Jimmy. So, for real, Jimmy's in trouble, and that is excellently written. Moving on to episode 3, Sunk Costs. A nice successor for the last episode. It kinda tunes down the tension, but still keeps the suspense. First, Mike and Gus teamed up for the first time, and it's amazing. What Mike did to help Gus was clever and brilliant. The only issue I had with Gus on this episode is how oddly kind and human he is when he talked to Mike. But then I realized, yeah, this is the young Gus. The young Gus should not be as cold-blooded and dangerous as the one in Breaking Bad. But still, Giancarlo Esposito is the perfect actor for this role. Then we also see where did Jimmy end up after what happened last episode. The montages were great as always, and I'm still rooting for Jimmy. Over to episode 4, Sabra Seto. Still, the show keeps its pace, making it entertaining while keeping it slow and detailed. The story relies on 2 main plotlines now, which is Jimmy vs. Chuck plotline and the Gus vs. Hector plotline, which makes the story dramatically more interesting. Ever since Gus's return and Chuck's accusation on Jimmy, the show suddenly became entertaining and was full of brilliant ideas. On this episode, we witnessed great scenes like Hector going into Los Pollos Hermanos and Jimmy collaborating with Mike again. And man, I do sympathize with Jimmy, and I didn't like how biased the situation was. So I'm rooting for Jimmy and Kim even more, and I'm hooked to the story again. The first half of the season ended with episode 5, Chicanery. Mind-blowing. The endless mind games of Jimmy versus Chuck is mind-blowing and shocking as hell. It's like one of those battle episodes in Game of Thrones. This entire episode is about the trial of Jimmy versus Chuck. The actor did an amazing job this episode. Bob Odenkirk was so in character as always, and Michael McKean, the actor of Chuck, was surprisingly good in this episode. I was even more surprised when I saw this episode scored a whopping 9.8 on IMDb. And yes, this is arguably the best Better Call Saul episode I've ever seen so far. Again, this episode really entertains while still keeps being legally accurate. The writing is great. It's like 12 Angry Men, without having any action, only by using dialogues and emotional acting performances. This episode achieved something unexpectedly epic. Then it's episode 6, Offbrand, which is a pretty decent successor to the dramatic previous episode, Chicanery. Jimmy continued to solve his problems in the cheapest way possible, while Nacho was still under the rule of Hector. More Crazy 8 is always fun to watch, but this episode lacks Mike. Mike haven't appeared on the show for 2 episodes now. Where are you? So basically, Jimmy couldn't run his commercials, but he still had 9 airings, so that means he'll lose more money. And to fix that problem is to make an ad, star in it, but not as Jimmy McGill, but as Saul Goodman. Guys, Saul Goodman had returned. Moving on to episode 7, Expenses. Seems like the show has returned to its slow state. This episode is basically about what Nacho is planning to do with Hector and more Jimmy and his money troubles. I like how Jimmy continued to do cheap tricks to help himself and Kim, but nonetheless, he failed, and he's almost broke now. There's not really much to say about this episode other than I still root for Jimmy. Okie dokie, moving on to episode 8, Slip. Jimmy tripped and slipped. Slippin' Jimmy, while Nacho slipped the pills. First of all, the show is not slowing down. Other than those argument scenes between Kim and Howard, and other than the Nacho scenes, and other than the doctor scenes with Chuck, all the scenes are entertaining. Nacho scenes with Hector is incredibly suspenseful, and that scene was dissected into parts, so it was more extra suspenseful. So I really like it, and I'm really rooting for Nacho. And then we have Jimmy's scenes, where he used a lot of cheap tricks to earn small amounts of money that means a lot to him, because he's basically broke. And it's great to see Jimmy's ingenious scams, because we all know Jimmy didn't do much in Season 2, other than the number swap. Other than the slow scenes, we have another solid and entertaining episode. Then it's episode 9, Fall, which responds to the previous episode title, Slip. Pretty cool. First of all, I like Nacho's character and how he dealt with Hector, but the cartel plotline didn't do much this episode. But Mike and Lydia met each other for the first time, and that's pretty cool. Second, Jimmy's using his cheap tricks again, and this time it's about the Sandpiper settlement, which is interesting, and the montages are great. In the last scene, I knew something's gonna go wrong, and it did, so I quite enjoyed the scene. And Howard was always on Chuck's side in the previous seasons, but to see him being more independent and egotistic is some fresh new content. Other than that, there's not much to say about this episode, other than it's another awesome episode. Over to episode 10, Lantern. Sounds like a very deep episode title, which means a dramatic season finale is expected. But yes, that means a spoiler alert! First of all, the Hector scene is great. Hector took his pills and passed out, which is a good thing. Nacho's plan worked out. We can also see how honorable of a person Gus is. And hopefully the final Sandpiper scene, in order for Jimmy to make Irene's friends like her again, he publicly humiliated himself, which is the bravest thing to do for Jimmy. And finally, at the very end, Chuck became crazy and started digging holes in his house to find a device that's not connected to the main power. And then, in the last scene, Chuck pushed his lantern over and set his house on fire. So he's probably dead in the next season. But yeah, it's not Breaking Bad. It focused on the legal life more than the cartel life. So it's actually quite impressive that the writers can still pull off such a memorable death scene without any explosions or gunshots. At the end, this season is better than all the previous seasons. Gus's return made the show even more entertaining. But what compels the story the most is Jimmy's and Chuck's feud, which is really well written. I also like how the show takes time to introduce its characters, making the story realistic as ever. Other than a couple of slow, aimless scenes, the show is entertaining and dramatic overall. Less humor, more drama. That's what happened on this season. The worst is episode 1, Mabel, and the best is, well, of course, episode 5, Chicanery. I'm saying Better Call Saul season 3 is mind-blowing, and I'm giving it a 9 out of 10. So, have you watched Better Call Saul season 3? From 1 to 10, how much would you rate it? Like if you like, and subscribe if you want more. Better Call Saul.